Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I am Matthew McQuilla, and I am here with Professor Larry Catá to discuss his book, Hong Kong Between One Country and Two Systems. Today, we are discussing Chapter 19, Shirley Yu, on Hong Kong and the Construction of the Post-Global Empire, written on Sunday, October 20th, 2019. How are you doing, Professor Backer?
All right, all right. It's been fun working through each of the chapters. Um,
We're just trudging along, trudging along. We're on the downward slope of the mountain if you compare the mountain to the book. So this chapter was a relatively short one, and you talk about Shirley Yu's essay or an essay or analysis of the situation. Can you talk about why you wanted to discuss this in your book?
well, this was really a pause kind of thing. We've been, as you recall, we've been looking at the 5 demands on the student side, the development of kind of discursive coalescing. On the protester side, from almost the beginning, there was discursive coalescing on the part of the central and local authorities. But in the context, and I'd mentioned off and on how, in a way, you can't look at Hong Kong, even though, the global is local, at the same time, the local is global. And this chapter really focuses on that second part. We've been looking at how the global is local and the eruptions in Hong Kong, but here really it's how the global is local. Here we're looking at how the local is global. And in the process, situating Hong Kong, not just in terms of the protest, but situating Hong Kong as it is and as it may likely develop over the course of the next half century. And the trigger for all of this was what I thought was a really clear and rich, it was a short but actually clear and rich analysis by Shirley Yu, who is well known. She was a Chinese national television news anchor, wound up at LSE as an LSE scholar for a while. And I think she was a fellow at the Kennedy School as well. And she writes this piece at this time. This is what I was reacting to. Again, we're in the middle of October. And she writes this piece for the Hong Kong, the Hong Kong paper, the English language paper, the South China Morning Post, effectively arguing or suggesting that whether the Hong Kong people knew it or not, Hong Kong is, both by definition and in fact, under China's control. And that control is not just formal and normative, as in, yes, we all know and agree that China has full sovereignty over the space of Hong Kong, but that it's far more comprehensive than that. And it made me pause at this point because I'm thinking, wow, okay, well, you have all those people on the streets in Hong Kong who are viewing this in a very different way than she's viewing it, but she's viewing it from a very different perspective because of where they're coming from than the Hong Kong protesters or the local folks. Let's take a look at this. And in the process, what becomes very evident and something that we have tended to miss, between June and October, is the way in which, in a lot of ways, Hong Kong is a metaphor perhaps, or a proxy better, a proxy for really potentially titanic changes. I use the word titanic actually quite deliberately because it was both the magnificent, incredible ship that wouldn't sink, and then the ship who, by sinking when it was impossible for it to sink, really changed fundamentally the way the way culture back in the early 20th century viewed technology. In this case, Hong Kong is that nodal point of, again, titanic changes that that affect not just the relationship between China and the liberal democratic camp led by the United States, but also bring better into light the way in which China now is more proactively setting up its own footprint within this global space in ways that, again, this is the Titanic is now sinking. And by the Titanic here, I mean 1945 to 2016 globalization, unitary, a globalization that was meant to bring unity and diversity, convergence. And now, boom, we're actually looking on the American side, America first, on the Chinese side with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the reconstruction of globalization in fact, to what I call post-global imperial models. And we can get into that a little bit if you like. And so that's why the think piece that she wrote just kind of was like this door that I couldn't resist walking through. And it was a door walking through Hong Kong to actually situate it in a very different place than either the protesters or the very laser pointed discursive development of the central authorities would point you to.
So can you go into a little bit more detail about those two post-global models that are set forth by the two great powers?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked. And we did not rehearse that, but it was perfect. Well, in a way, if you think about, let's start with the way in which the discourse in Hong Kong is now developing. You've got maybe two and a half different discursive thrusts. The first one, right, is the central authorities thrust, which is nationalistic, centered on, and I don't use nationalism here in a bad way, it's just is focused on the nation, right? It's neutral, and y'all can invest the word nationalism with whatever good or bad you bring to that word. That's not my point. My point is there it is, do with it what you will, but it's there, right? A kind of nation centering approach that then puts Hong Kong very close to the center of the nation, as certainly within that core constellation of government. On the other hand, you've got, represented by the Sino-UK joint statement, you've got an internationalist position that sees Hong Kong as a bridge and an exemplar of the old globalization model, where sovereignty and and nationalism is far less important than the interlinking networks through which free movements of goods, capital, investment, and ultimately people can move forward in this coalescing singularity that we call globalization. And then you've got the Hong Kong protesters themselves looking for autonomy or a space within it that could be skewed either towards the national model or, and certainly from one reading of the five demands to an internationalist model. Well, while this is going on, the development of these things, a nationalist, China-centered model, an internationalist model, and then this centering thing, simultaneously, the Americans and the Chinese are, you don't want to use the word war, they are vigorously and quite aggressively reshaping in the name of the old order, but they're going to chuck the old order. In the name of the old order, they are reframing the way in which globalization is understood and their places within it. And so you have, starting in 2013, 2014 in China, and then, springing up after 2016 in the United States, the notion of America first on the one hand and Belt and Road Initiative on the other. And both of them suggest a recentering of globalization in a sense, not with a project of convergence among all states, but a project of divergence, fundamental divergence based on political, economic, ideological models, and then developing a set of relations from out of the centers of these ideological camps out. right? The Belt and Road Initiative is probably the classical model. The American version was crude, and it was significantly challenged, of course, in the liberal democratic camp, certainly through 2020. It remains. There's a question whether what we have with the current administration is America First renamed, but essentially the same thrust, now called a multilateralism that puts forward the fundamental principles of liberal democracy and markets, which looks like America First without the nasty title. Right, but still, at the time, it was crude, and it tended to be marginalized among the elite as a concept, even as it began to get a lot of traction on the ground. But the Chinese system is more elegantly characteristic of this emerging new system, this post-global imperialism. One, there's no territories. People think of imperialism, they think of, oh, well, you're conquering or controlling a territory, you're conquering and controlling people. It's based on a hierarchy grounded in race or religion or language or ethnicity or something. Post-global empires, no, that's your granddad's or your grandma's imperialism. This is an imperial project that is grounded on the management and control of significant networks of production that extend across the globe, across territories, both abstract and concrete territories, but all of them then centered, like the Belt and Road Initiative, on a hub and spoke model. The hub in the Belt and Road Initiative is, of course, Beijing. And by Beijing is also metaphor, it's the Chinese state and the Chinese apparatus. And then the spokes are the Silk Roads, the Maritime Silk Road, the Land Silk Road, the Space Silk Road, the Arctic Silk Road, the Abstract Silk, these roads, which actually spike out and then develop systems where all of these then converge in and through, right, the center. And they are animated by and made efficient and produce prosperity by conformity with at least some significant measure of the political economic model on which it is created. All right, so that's what we're looking at. And if you're looking at that, it's of course, it's more complicated than that, but this isn't a lecture on the Belt and Road Initiative. I was beginning to sound like one, sorry, folks. But if you think about that, so you've got hub and spoke, you've got the spokes going out, you're not looking at territory, but you're looking at control of global production chains, and they can exist simultaneously. America First and Belt and Road can exist down parallel paths in the same quote unquote spaces, but actually controlling very different things. And within that, of course, there are degrees of intimacy between the periphery and the center, right? And so you've got the sovereign place, you've got the bridge, the sovereign bridge areas, and then you've got dependencies, that is states or production chains that then go down with respect to which the nature and character of obligation and influence will diminish as you go out the spokes, but it's based on influence and management grounded in or centered on these production chains. All right, so at this point you're going, all right, so Backer's now gone off on this spoke from the hub. He's now off somewhere, I don't know where. What does this have to do with Hong Kong, right? Which is a question. So what does this have to do with Hong Kong? And what does this have to do with Shirley Yu? And the answer is, well, when you're looking at this and you're looking at control, you go, well, if that's the case, then where does Hong Kong fit in? If the central authorities are rejecting the internationalist model, then Hong Kong no longer fits comfortably as an autonomous or semi-autonomous bridge. And I think Yu is absolutely right in suggesting that that bridge was both temporary and unstable, and that for her it means a reversion back. And I would agree. a reversion back, but what does that mean? Well, you can't look, if in fact Hong Kong is not unique, then it requires you to look, I think, a little more carefully at its geography. Not its abstract geography, but its concrete geography. And it sits, of course, when you look at this, where's Hong Kong? Hong Kong is situated in the middle of a very large river basin that is populated by a number of cities, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and others, and Macau off in I guess it's to its west, southwest. But when you look at it, and you look at it on a map, ooh, if we're looking at the development of a hub and spoke model, if we're looking at a Belt and Road Initiative, and we're looking at moving out with bridges along the edges, then where does Hong Kong fit in? Well, Hong Kong doesn't really fit in, or may not fit in as Hong Kong alone. Hong Kong may now be, and certainly after the end of the term, 2047, but now earlier perhaps, may be absorbed first more deeply into the metropolis. And that goes back to, all right, so Hong Kong is now fully under the control of China, and that control will be based on its absorption within the greater metropolis, the mega metropolis, which is the Pearl River Delta. And if that's the case, then the people of Hong Kong there should not be, ought to be worrying not so much about what animated the protests in the first place, but they've got much, much bigger challenges for Hong Kong autonomy that's just over the horizon. And that challenge is its absorption, right, as a district of a greater area, which is geared to be the entry port for China's global Belt and Road network of post-global management of its economic relations.
Wow.
So that's sort of what the chapter is about. It goes into substantially more detail. It's meant to be provocative, but that was the thinking at the time. We return to this theme actually later on in another essay, but this is the and its publication in the South China Morning Post, that for me was kind of telling. That's usually the paper that projects a Chinese voice, quote unquote, out into the world. It's read by foreigners, unlike some of the other Hong Kong papers, which are, just Chinese or Cantonese. So to be placed there, you're looking out, and to some extent, because you're situated in Hong Kong, you're looking over your shoulder, you're looking in the other direction as well. But I thought that this was a nice place where we can begin to resituate, because we're now June, July, August, September, we're now October in month 5, to resituate this thing that doesn't seem to be going away, and I can't see an endpoint here at this point, to resituate it, to see, well, are the stakes merely the stakes that we thought that when we started in June? Well, clearly not, but are they just the bigger Hong Kong stakes or something else involved? And this was sort of an essay that played with that notion, and in a sense, a self-provocation at the time. Ooh, this is something I can look at. And then we'll tease it out a little further as time moves along from October to the next year.
You were able to touch on all the future questions that I was going to have on this chapter, but unless you have anything else to add to this, thank you for talking to me again about this chapter. And this honestly is a mind-blowing chapter. It's not something that I got the first time I read it. I do remember when I read this for the first time, I didn't quite grasp the gravity of what you were discussing in it until we discussed it later. And so I'm glad that you were able to dissect it for people who are going to read this book, and they can read it from that perspective and hopefully gain what you intended on them to understand.
Right. Or perhaps read it and say, Backer, I don't know what you were thinking in October 2019, but that ain't what actually went on. Either way, it reflects, at worst, it'll reflect thinking at the time, and you know, where things might go in an era of significant uncertainty. But with that, we'll pick it up with the next chapters. We're kind of coming to the point where everything is set.
Mhm.
We've now developed, or the Hong Kong situation is developed almost completely. And then from there, we move from development to working towards the end.
Yes.
So there's going to be a shift coming up. Right now, it looks like the momentum, to some extent, is on the side of the Hong Kong protesters. They're still around. It's been 5 months, and people are going, "Wow, right? Things will change, and when they do, they'll change rapidly." And to some extent, we can start by beginning to use the word COVID, 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 which soon, we're already at the end of October, is going to start changing everything.
Don't
But
give away
that's
too much. Don't give away too much to the
no,
people.
no, 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 no. It's all in the
Make it
detail.
But all right. Well, thank you for sitting and speaking with me. And
It was,
you have a nice day. And everyone out there listening, go buy the book.
yes, yes, buy the book. It's reasonably priced. All right.